Christina and HRC for allowing me this space, and all of you for coming. Today's going to be a little weird, I would hope. Being the topic that we're discussing today is UFO and other kind of paranormal phenomena. So I'll try and make it as like accessible, eccentric, also funny. I'm trying to workshop my humor today. As you'll see, just this field of ufology is actually really funny. Yes. That said, I think I also, I want to be serious, obviously, and I'll try and maybe keep it under 40-45 minutes so that there's so I have or give space for a Q&A. It's a slight alteration to the title, so Christina. It's UFO studies in the realm of Indigenous aesthetics. And first, I want to take 10 seconds of silence to honor and to acknowledge, to acknowledge the ongoing tragedies of this country, the genocides that have occurred in U.S. American soil in Virginia, and also the ongoing genocide in Gaza. So if you could just take 10 seconds of silence. Thank you. To get started, I want to start with a little conversation and maybe a little side quest into kind of illegitimate sciences. And in doing so, maybe to continue to consider maybe the kinds of knowledge bases that are currently lacking. So one question maybe that I have actually for myself as I was writing this lecture was really why do we combine, or why are we overlapping ufology with the fine arts? Also, can we have the mics? Oh. Is this better? No? I don't want to spit on it,
You can try to hold your mic.
Is that better?
The podium mic seems to work.
Hello? Let me see, is that? Yeah, but I kind of want to move around.
Fair enough.
This is, yeah, better. Thank you. Okay, so also let me just try and shake my nerves, because I think, all things considered, this kind of conversation and the proposal for this lecture already kind of felt like a risk. I think because as an academic, I think a lot of us have these implicit and built-in biases that there's certain areas of thinking and of disciplinary training that we just shouldn't go down, right? And as some best people have said, the ufology studies areas is filled with like clown shows. I'm offering right now a class on UFO studies, and one of the things that we think about a lot in this class is arcane knowledge systems, but also conspiracy theories and madness and derangement. And so how do we deal with that? So I have here my natal chart. I'm not going to give you everything. I went and censored a lot of it. I'm very private. I'm a sun in Scorpio. Maybe a very kind of Scorpio thing of me to do is to like eliminate all the other planets. But I wanted to show you and to direct you to the 12th house. I have a Jupiter in Cancer in the 12th house. And I know that sounds like gibberish probably, or for many of you if you're not an astrologer, although actually in the arts community I'm sure there's maybe quite a few astrologers in the room. The basics of it is, the 12th house represents deep spirituality, intuition. It's ruled by Pisces. Jupiter is the planet right here, a symbolic representation of Jupiter that is ostensibly a kind of a benefactor or a giving kind of entity or planetary body. And then in Cancer is sort of situates me as a very kind of maternal figure, which maybe my students in the room, you can attest to this. essentially, this is, as I was describing what this placement meant to a friend said, "Oh, so you're a spiritual gossip." So there's a certain kind of information and downloads that I receive, and then I'll text back my friends to be like, "Guess what I found?" And so I'm thinking here just about tapping into deep kind of ancient traditions. The Sibyl is a figure within kind of ancient Greek culture. They were these women who would go into caves, and as you can see here on the right, maybe that's like me in the dark room inhaling all the fumes. But Sibyls would go into these sort of natural crevices, fractures in the earth, and then inhale these fumes that would emerge out of these kind of volcanic cracks. And through that, they would deliver these like immense, beautiful prophecies that were deeply guarded and secretive. And some of them, there's theories, that they predicted Obama's victory, that they predicted Watergate. And so I think it's a practice, actually, this practice of soothsaying that we could probably parallel to the work of the artist. And this is something that I think is being kind of developed right now in some ufology circles, is the role of the artist in performing a kind of sort of labor of an oracle, right? All that to say that I because this is an emerging field and this is like an in-progress lecture, if you're wondering, as I it's gonna get tired if I keep saying like, oh, the current theory says this. This is my way of saying this natal chart is my way of, like, if you're asking like what's your source or what's your citation, my answer would be like, trust me, bro. Like, the planets have me. So here's just kind of a rundown of our chapters, so that you have a sense of where we're going. And I want to, essentially, I think also like this placement, this natal chart placement, is like, what I want to offer to you is like, I want to spill the beans. If you were around in the spring, Dr. Pasulka, who's one of the main prominent writers on the UFO phenomena, she came to talk to VCU last semester. And so what I'm doing right now is really kind of a supplement to the areas that I thought that really can be augmented. So Dr. Pasulka, when she came to talk to VCU, was mostly discussing ufology and paranormal phenomena through a lens of religious studies. So I'm going to borrow a lot of her ideas, but also kind of synthesize other areas of research that I'm currently really fascinated by. And I just decided to sort of break it up according to maybe kind of the more pressing questions that you might be wondering about, if you're completely new to ufology and the UFO phenomena, or if you've been keeping pace with the kind of declassification of like government reporting that's been going on since probably the early 2000s and 2010s, 2020s as well. So the first one is what are we? And I think this is my way of really trying to describe a sort of arcane, mystical insight into what exactly the human body is. And my kind of brief way of saying this is that, what are we? Let's look to Dragon Ball and to Goku as a kind of an example of this. We are advanced primate memory coils functioning as hydroelectric technology. As a big mouthful, and it's just a big long way of saying that we're magical monkeys with amnesia. We have an enormous amount of information that's like encoded in our DNA, and this is what I mean by a sort of memory coil. Is essentially we are not so much like just material, bone and flesh, but there is some of our fundamental kind of principles is that we are DNA. We're a living DNA. And through different practices, different ritualistic practices, we can kind of unlock this kind of powerful magic or alchemy, for kind of a lack of better words. If you are aware of the Dragon Ball kind of mythology, essentially Goku is an alien who lands on Earth, but he hits himself on the head, and so he doesn't remember who he is, which I think is kind of a really beautiful way of maybe describing the kind of amnesia that kind of our cognitive, our abilities have and that we're currently dealing with. Philip K. Dick, in his book Ballast, he comes up with, he's borrowing from different like esoterica, so he uses this terminology, anamnesis, and that through different kinds of ritualistic practices like dance, like art making, one essentially loses this amnesia, right? Is that you remember that you are a Super Saiyan, basically. And here's just a poem in Spanish that I came up with doing like a kind of like a visionary quest, which I don't think I should get into so much because I think explaining it might be intense, but Oro buscaron, encontraron el mono y se enamoraron. There's theories, you know, that these ET or interstellar civilizations came to Earth, they edited our DNA, they were mining for gold, using early Homo sapiens as like a labor force, but eventually one of these like ETs fell in love with a female Homo sapien, and then the rest is history. This is kind of how we emerge. So different, almost like the interruption of like Genesis. Actually, well, I'm not sure. That's a TBD. So what are we, right? And this is, you see it also in the mythology of Sailor Moon. So anime has, I think, some really beautiful like metaphysical truths embedded in it. A quote, this is actually a meme that popped up today on Instagram, where the cat reveals to Serena, you know, the time has come for you to remember who you truly are. We'll keep going, and so this is going to be I only have two kind of thesis statements. My first thesis is something that I've actually been just developing for a while, that I wanted to articulate today with you guys, is that truth is hidden in plain sight in the pages of fiction. And that's literature, that's science fiction, creative writing, that's poetry, and the fine arts. All of the fine arts are a kind of like a fiction play. So why now? Why is this such I think recently the kind of subculture that has developed around paranormal phenomena has really exploded. I mean, the class that I offered this fall filled up within like a couple weeks, and I think that just kind of shows, or is evidence of the sort of remarkable interest that there is to study this kind of unreal kind of phenomena within the place of academia. Here's the next couple of slides are sort of like my speculation as to like why that is, so like why now, why this moment. Part of it has to deal with our media culture. This is a sort of an inventory and an itemized list of the number of UFO films that have appeared in the past like 20, or going back like 30 years. And as you'll notice, in the 90s, we had like Mars Attack, which is a classic, by the way. If you've seen that film, it's remarkable. It's very funny. Men in Black, right? And then as we keep going, you see the 2000s, 2010s. In the last 20 years, the genre has like exploded. And this is only film, so this doesn't include. And this is AI putting this together. But we're not even thinking about the kind of television media that is out there. So in a sense, this kind of development, I think, in film media has to do with the kind of anticipation or even the anxiety around artificial intelligence, which I'll get to in a moment. But as Pasulka sort of argues in her book Encounters that just came out in 2023, media essentially distributes and disseminates mythologies, grand mythological narratives that start to affect our epigenetic environment. So another way of saying this would be that media and art essentially changes the expression of our DNA, right? Which I think is a beautiful, remarkable, profound statement as to the effects of art and visual culture on our daily perception. So the fact that we've had this for this development of media is, I think, also very interesting. AI has been anticipated. AI, I think, like photography, doesn't have one single author, and it's almost something that had to happen. This is also reiterated within discussions and discourses around the invention of photography. That photography, as many of you probably know, has a lot of contested authors. We say that there's people in France or Germany, or there's different kind of patent debates around it. And essentially, I think this is a very kind of analogous to the development of AI. These technologies, in a way, had to be developed and came about through a kind of like community and a sort of like social necessity and desire for these technologies to exist. A couple people to look into that I think have also pinned that or really anticipated kind of the same anticipation would be like Walter Benjamin and Molina-Garcia. In 1928, so Walter Benjamin has an article where he's discussing the sort of growing fascination with, or really the scaling of technology up to the kind of like planetary level. And he says, that the exclusive emphasis on an optical connection to the universe, to which astronomy very quickly led, contained a portent of what was to come. So just bolding here the fact that he's thinking about an optical mechanism as something that's very important for our continued technological advancement. Secondly, Molina-Garcia in the 90s comes up with this book, or writes this book, War in the Age of Intelligent Machines, and he says in the early chapters that we may even imagine specialized robot historians that are committed to tracing the various technological lineages that gave rise to their species. One of those lineages obviously would be the kind of sensory capacity, so the ability to see and to interpret data through a kind of visual input. And so maybe you're following my track of thought here. I say this in class a lot, and I feel like I never get a reaction out of my students, so I'm kind of testing this with you guys. So to add to this chorus, I think to add to what Molina-Garcia and Walter Benjamin are saying, the world, okay, this is my argument. The world did end in December 21st, 2012, a version of the world. I know this is kind of like a big collage inundation of JPEGs here, but the 2012 phenomenon really, if you were around that moment, it really scared a lot of people. We thought that, the world was crashing, computers were gonna crash. A couple kind of connecting threads here, or a way of maybe that I'm synthesizing this. Terence McKenna, who's really infamous for his advocacy for like psilocybin culture and psychedelia in general. Also really a really insightful spiritual man. Connected the December 21st date to what he says here, I'm just quoting directly from my Wikipedia article, an extremely novel event in human history as a signal that the final phase had begun. And he was doing other crazy things where he was using the I Ching, Chinese divination, and creating this chart where he essentially said, and then he was looking to the Mayans and changed his mind about the date and said, actually, there's something that's going to go on in December of 2012. In 2012, technologically speaking or cybernetically speaking, is a breakthrough for deep learning. Me Googling a couple years ago, I was interested in this, and I thought, okay, there must be something that happened on that date that correlates with the development of AI. And lo and behold, I do some Googling, and December 21st, 2012 is actually the date when the competition results for an early AI were released. It was a competition that was held in Toronto, and this one algorithm won because it was able to guess, upwards of like 70 or 80% of the images that were being fed to it. So I would argue that this is that this date and this naming of the algorithm, because it had a name, it was called AlexNet. AlexNet essentially sort of opens its eye, and I would say that this date then correlates with this sort of major novel event that Terence McKenna predicted much earlier. Right? Wild, crazy stuff. I was really proud of myself with this one. I don't know. I think someone should give me credit for that. Moving forward, right? So a lot has happened in the last couple of decades. I think we're all dealing with the repercussions of AI and AI in the classroom. This maybe can be like part of the Q&A if you want to keep talking about AI. Moving along though, so why don't they talk to us, right? So this is, you might look into what is called the Fermi's paradox. Fermi's paradox is named after the scientist who came up with it. Essentially, it's trying to describe this contradiction or it's trying to explain the contradiction of our relative isolation from interstellar civilizations. As the question goes, or the theory goes, it's like, if the universe is so big, then why have we not experienced a kind of a contact event, sort of a spectacle? I have issues with Fermi's paradox because it assumes that contact has never happened. And because this is my conversation and my talk really is centering indigenous thought, you really, we should understand and have a basis for the way in which indigenous epistemics and culture, ancient civilizations, the Vedas, ancient India, like all of these societies already had a place for extraterrestrial or interdimensional encounters. They would call them, I think the southwestern indigenous people would say that these are star nations, that they are kind of star nations that then we can, also through a kind of like ritualistic mode, we can participate in that kind of sharing between them. Fermi's paradox then has become a little bit more complicated in the aftermath of the atomic bomb. There, I think after 1947, with the development of like nuclear technology, the kinds of sightings around UFOs have increased dramatically, I would say. And so this is around this time, this is really when like the US government starts to pay attention. So that's maybe another kind of point to make, is that this is not necessarily the beginning of like sightings, but it's the beginning of when mainstream authorities and US American authorities took notice. A funny thing about Roswell, right, is like popular theory or the lore around UFO goes that these flying saucer, that a flying saucer crashed, that there was an incident, it crash landed in New Mexico. I was, again, like Jupiter and Cancer in the 12th house, I got a sort of a download after meditating one day, and I was thinking about this. It's like, oh, this was not a crash landing. It wasn't accidental. It was like a gift. Because if it really was such an advanced civilization, right, like they wouldn't make an accident in their aerodynamics. And this theory has also been, I think, reiterated by Dr. Pasolka in a podcast she did with Joe Rogan, where she says she visited Roswell with a couple people related to military authorities, and she says, when I went to Roswell, they don't call it a crash, they call it a donation. So I think a possibility here would be that an ET civilization was gifting humanity a toy. It was merely that. It was just a toy to test to see what Homo sapien culture would do with it. And we essentially kind of obviously like failed the test, right? Because then the military industrial complex sort of took over, and then as the theory or the lore goes, they've been trying to reverse engineer the crashes, so-called crash landings. Another theory as to why don't they talk to us, I think to get at Fermi's paradox, there is an answer to Fermi's paradox is that the aliens essentially are disguising themselves. They're camouflaging themselves because they cannot have an interaction with like our current knowledge system and the way that we're operating. Like there's just like too much violence. I would point you to Alien Romulus, which is a recent film that just came out, kind of the newest iteration of the Alien franchise, as a really great metaphor for what happens when our current system of capitalism is allowed to exist or allowed to go beyond our Earth-based system. As I have it here, capitalism in the stars would equal death. And to sort of perform a little film analysis on that film, I would say the xenomorph really represents kind of this kind of capitalist urge to consume and consume bodies. And so what happens when capitalism is in the stars, it begets monster after monster after monster, right? So this is the kind of the basic anatomy and the biological condition of the xenomorph is that it clones itself and just creates monsters that are only looking to kill. So all that to say that another theory as to why the angels or the aliens don't talk to us is because we have not crafted a type of Christ, Buddha consciousness, which is just kind of a short way of saying that we don't have enough of a loving atmosphere and a loving consciousness, because the kinds of weapons that we have just cannot be allowed to go outside our system. There's a ufologist, Stephen Greer, who also argues that essentially, because of this technology, we are in quarantine. And so Earth is a kind of a purgatory, in a way. What are they, right? And this is like skipping through a lot. And I'm giving you a lot, but I also just like, I think I want to have an interesting conversation at the end, and I want to see kind of where this takes us. So what are they? What are these sightings and this phenomena? I think before answering that, we have to think about, or this concept, the omega point, which is conceived and was coined by Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. He was a Jesuit paleontologist. He was also a religious studies scholar, theologian. And in this book, The Phenomenon of Man, he is sort of predicting this the omega point, which is, according to him, a kind of intensification and unification of the Earth and Homo sapien networks. So there's going to be a point essentially where our type of cognitive thinking, our physical reality will merge further and further with not only with other people, but also with the organic Earth. There's also, he comes up with this term, the noosphere, to describe kind of the kind of electromagnetic communication or the language that the Earth provides naturally. In indigenous cultures, they make a space for that type of communication, right? So ancient languages, for example, are kind of a sonic attempt at trying to understand the kinds of instructions that the Earth is sending us. So I know that's a lot. So essentially, that's sort of the omega point. And at this point, once we reach the omega point, that would lead to all kinds of different developments and evolutions of our cognitive abilities. There might be involved things like telepathy and clairvoyance, synchronicities, etc. So what I've taken so far, and granted this is a work in progress lecture, but we've been discussing this recently. Actually, yesterday I talked about this in my UFO studies class. Is that the ETs are essentially a kind of a spectrum. It's like there's a big range of them. There might be millions of like extraterrestrial life. They're a spectrum of inter and multidimensional time-space engineers of an already or a soon-to-arrive omega point. And I want to just kind of highlight that last part, already or soon-to-arrive. So either this might be in our future, in our near future, or there might have been already advanced civilizations like the Incas in Machu Picchu, for example, or other. The Olmecs, this is kind of getting into like ancient alien theories, but that these mysterious disappearances or the kind of like orphanage of these advanced and ancient cities were not really accidental. It's just groups of people ascended. They exploded into like beams of light, and potentially what we might be seeing is like our ancient past, that they are actually the ones that might be navigating or piloting some of these like mandala-looking spaceships that we're seeing. So I kind of coined this phrasing that they're kind of non-local saviors, or guides. Really, I have issues with the word savior, and that's conversation for another time. But really more like sort of a benevolent force. So all that to say, thesis 2 is, or what I have arrived at is that the past is ahead of the future. I saw that in one of my journals. I'm not sure if I was quoting someone. There's like mad scribbles in front of me, so this is just kind of a summary, I think, of this previous slide. Okay, great. I'm so glad we're getting to this. I might skip over some of the, I think, later slides because I have a lot. But I want to show you, this is new work. As Christina mentioned, I have an interdisciplinary practice. I've been, for the past year and a half, I've been developing performance projects where I am going to different kind of sites of American history that are particularly sort of loaded with a lot of deep wounds, let's say. So I'm going to show you a still of the 2023 performance where I went to colonial Jamestown, and I was thinking a lot about the history of Pocahontas and the sort of lost memory of her nation, her indigenous nation. These are performances from this past summer, where I went to the National Mall, and well, I'll just play it, and then we can have a conversation about it. And sorry for the quality. I think my export kind of messed up when I was preparing the talk.
It's not good. It is accepted on one error and sees such a thing as urgency, solution is only an intellectual state that is begun. You must sin so that you might save yourself. The silent thoughts and ones who see that day, it's as if I had brought as a child that somewhere into the world began in 1866 on haunting news as the sorrowful mother still standing up. Starved Magdalena, Hail Mary, Mother of God, except for the name of our peace. Cuando Machoya heard the voice of God, she heard a gender-neutral voice that commanded to dress con ropas de un man, fulfilling the messianic prophecies of her old religion and religion. And for this transgression, fue quemada en la hoguera. Pero esta vez los chamanes, travestis, vivirán, orarán, cantarán su coro argénico, living los grandes magos urbarán, complexio, opositor, messenger of God, complexio, opositor, mensajero de los dioses, filia, el avatar savior, el espíritu redentor, avatar preserver of the world, que interpreta the maidens, hermaphrodite, present the world is out of balance, el mago, how many children have died in Gaza, el mundo is never known, energies calling around Gaza. The United States began with the rape of indigenous girls. The United States began with the rape of indigenous girls. We have lived ever since in a stillborn colony. There is no such thing as toxic masculinity. There exists an insanity from laws and offices grief. The mind has become deranged. As Plato discerned, there is a strain of the irrational in the world soul. But earth is encoded to rid itself of negativity. Women will rise up. They have only seen the beginning. Pocahontas came to me in a dream and told me, you have been immunized. No guidance can hurt you. What is the roach above? Next to the violence of the station flexing. The original instructions are back, and they have been written against the ways of the who speaks this tongue. Filia hermaphroditus. Our origin was not soil or water. Our starting point was always mind, a two-headed God. Never cyclones, but a species of holy dynamos, sacred twins, the Aeneid in the mythos of the Egyptians, the cosmogenesis of the African dodo, and Latin American omens, always pairs of twins, gender and sexuality. The first religions in the world have made biblical scripture come true. Genesis 1:27 and 1:28. Male and female he created them, and God said to them, sacred twins, the Aeneid in the mythos of the Egyptians, the cosmogenesis of the African dodo, and Latin American omens, always pairs of twins. Gender and sexuality, the first religions in the world have made biblical scripture come true. Genesis 1:27 and 1:28. Male and female he created them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply. So we did. The I Ching has 64 configurations of gendered energy called hexagrams. What is the opposite of a crucifixion? A resurrection. It is the child that names the mother. From it, all is learned. Unite your opposites, humanity. Close your eyes and go back to learning the sacred arts of living in a cave.
just a preview, really, of kind of what I've been working on. And here's some stills from the 23 performances. Can I get here? And if you want to see this video, I just kind of included a QR code for you guys. For time's sake, you know, I'm not showing you everything. And yeah, there's so much to talk about. I mean, it's just funny, I make this work and then it's like, now I have to be responsible for. I think there's audio in the audience. Okay, thanks. Me being the artist, I'm sort of responsible for kind of articulating it, and I think I'm probably gonna have to spend a good amount of time deconstructing it. There's so much to talk about here between, you know, the sort of metaphors between bugs and people, the significance of the roach and what it signifies within sort of my larger interest in Indigenous studies, the etymology alone of the cockroach. When roaches are small, when they're babies, they're called nymphs, which is the etymology of the word nymph means young bride. So take that for what you will. There's all kinds of religious symbolism in this work. Obviously, I'm performing in a sort of very loaded settings that I think themselves, like the National Mall, is a kind of an unspoken temple. It is sort of sold, or it's, you know, marketed as a kind of just a neutral mark of American and USA patrimony, but its architecture is sort of distinctly Masonic, etc. Here in my interruption of these spaces, I'm sort of trying to kind of admit what is sort of obvious, is that these sites are incredibly loaded on a spiritual level, and are probably performing a type of like conditioning of the mind of tourists that are going to these sites. Here's the full text, just because the way the text right now is working is that I'm intending it to be a little hypnotic, but also because I wanted to cite my sources, just so you could kind of get a sense of like how and which kinds of texts I'm synthesizing. There's Philip K. Dick, there's science fiction, Julia Kristeva, so she's a major, wonderful, hard to read philosopher. Arthur Evans, a very sort of marginal historian. There's Carl Jung, an abduction podcast, Plato, and the Bible, I Ching, and as well as other Plato's allegory of the cave. And so I'm trying, as I think I said earlier, is essentially trying to synthesize a lot of different global traditions and philosophical texts as well. Moving into, I think, maybe a small deconstruction of the videos. Carl Jung has essentially really solved this puzzle. You know, I don't know that I'm doing anything really new, or even Pasolka admits that Carl Jung's full book, Flying Saucers, really covers the full extent of this material in this area of study. Here's just a wonderful quote that sort of relates to this project. So he says, if the UFOs were living organisms, one would think of a swarm of insects rising with the sun, not to fight one another, but to mate and celebrate the marriage flight. And I think that this really kind of gets to the kind of duality and the complexities of the roach as a motif, is that I'm using it really as a representation of the kind of blockages that are really right in front of us, that are preventing us from moving forward. But also is a way of trying to reframe our mind around what we consider to be a bug or to be a pest. If you notice the news, in military cultures, the enemy is usually loaded with a lot of this kind of animal metaphors. In Spanish, the word cuca means vagina, so it's like slang to refer to a woman's genitals. Right, so there's ways that we kind of animalize the body, and that I think in this work I'm trying to really interrupt with that kind of narrative. But I think Carl Jung also here is trying to alert us of the way that we need to shift away from a kind of like paranoia around difference, and like what if we look at the UFOs not under kind of a perspective that they're demonic beings, but actually are here to that it's that it's a matrimony, right, between sort of our systems and then whatever else is out there. And also keep in mind that these sightings have been ongoing. So this is a manuscript and an illustration that Carl Jung is studying that is dating from maybe like the 14th century. And also kind of a provoking question: what if bugs don't deserve to die, right? When your computer gets a bug, we don't just throw it away. We go to IT and we try and fix it. So I'm thinking too a lot about like course correction. Just trying to be mindful of time. Obviously, I'm wearing white in the second performances, so trying to refer there to both to like kind of like our visions of like matrimony and the bride, but also the Virgin Mary. A quote from Ingo Swann, who's another researcher into the paranormal, remote viewer, famous kind of remote viewer who worked for the CIA and the FBI. He says the term holy is taken from an old European word referring to the supernatural. So thinking about that kind of confluence and fluidity between what we might say is an alien or an angel. And artists, as I was saying, artists can really tap into this sensibility. Van Gogh's Starry Night actually came to him in a dream. It was a kind of like revelation. He calls it, referring to this painting, a pantheistic fancy, a remnant of an apocalyptic fantasy. Marian apparitions, also kind of another, not so much a little side quest, but related to the work that is happening in the performances. Marian apparitions have been ongoing and date to these very particular dates within colonization. One of the last ones, or at least one of the last ones that's discussed in Ingo Swann's book, happens in Rwanda in the 80s. The Virgin Mary essentially appears to a group of school children and tells them of the upcoming Rwandan genocide. And then shortly after, about a decade later, in September 1994, there's a UFO sighting again with school children. So the aerial school encounter is something that you might want to Google. So just thinking too about this spectacularity of the Virgin Mary and her kind of constant identities. There's all kinds of global cultures that make a space and carve a space for this divine mother, right? And she's gone by many names. I mean, even the Virgin Guadalupe in Mexico and in Latin America was a kind of readoption and an appropriation of an attempt to try and save their indigenous understanding of the cosmic mother, and they just kind of, so she kind of keeps changing names. But every time she appears, she comes with these really stern warnings. She's like, you guys are not doing it right, and like things are falling apart. It's like your energies are going bad. But no one listens, right? Everyone just kind of makes it into this sort of visual spectacle. And so in the performance, I'm trying to really, and in my text in particular, I'm trying to kind of offer a really stern warning. This is a lot. This is like hermetic practices or hermetic alchemy. My friend or my student David alerted me to this too, that I'm actually in a way sort of performing this kind of hermetic practice, and it's called the Magnus Opus. It refers to kind of a grand work, but also the kind of a grand work that can be performed in the interior. It's a 4-step process. It gets kind of minimized to 3 essential stages. The first one being putrefaction, the second purification, and then 3 reunification. So this is the performances I'm working on are kind of part of a trilogy. So eventually, I'll be wearing a red dress. Another quote from Carl Jung that is also quite remarkable. He says in his book, "It must be a relief in an epic of destruction to be the broom that sweeps the rubbish into the corner." So I just offer that to artists in the room too, to tell you, like, you chose the right discipline. You are doing such a just phenomenal labor to try and heal and cleanse our past. And I mean, again, also some of my mad jitterings, journal writings. This was just a quote too from a notebook page. HIV is an AI, it's an artificial intelligence. And in the work of Valis by Philip K. Dick, AI's name is Sophia, right? Sophia from the Greek meaning wisdom. A little bit more about this eventual magnus opus. I only have 8 minutes, so I'm kind of just breeze through. There's a kind of transgender perspective onto tarot, onto a lot of mystical practices, right? The rebus or the magnus opus, it is usually represented as a hermaphrodite in ancient texts and illustrations. And even, you know, the liquid property of mercury. Mercury is a flammable substance, but also works as water. So there's something there about, I think, that kind of reunification step that is alerting us to a combining of our distinct opposites, right? So I mentioned that in the poem in my video. And then towards the end, maybe let's see, I can kind of end here. This is kind of intense. But I just wanted to offer some words around trans femininity and the kinds of threats that we're seeing right now across the country, within our politics, the legislation that is out there delegitimizing trans identities. That what it's actually getting to, it's not just a political kind of battle that's happening, or trans people existing is not just a sort of a political issue or a viewpoint, but it's actually perhaps getting to something deeper. Reflecting on it, I would say that it's being trans is you are being part of a sort of a spiritual warfare with entities and I think with people who really deny and abuse this aspect, right, of spirituality. As I say in the poem, gender and sexuality were the first religions of the world. If you look at the Dogen here on the left, a lot of the men, in order to participate in these ritualistic practices, then essentially cross-dress and take on the attributes and the fashion of women. Quoting Arthur Evans and also combining, like myself, with Timothy Morton, who spoke recently here at U of R, that the first shamans were women and cross-dressing men practicing an exuberant contemplation, i.e. beauty. So beauty would be defined as this kind of exuberant observation and exuberant kind of manifestation of material, which is why they hate us. We're too beautiful. Maybe, and to add to this, right, so this is really maybe almost a kind of advocacy or a kind of, I don't have a lot of like cis men probably in the audiences at the School of the Arts. We run really, really feminine or effeminate. Maybe I should give this talk to like a gym or something, but my proposal to y'all would be, right, it's like to think about where masculinity, not necessarily men, but masculinity has failed in its mission, in its grand, larger mission to protect femininity. And if we look at kind of even our pervasive culture, I mean, we were at the National Mall with a couple of students, and you know, the little dancer of 14 years is displayed prominently in the National Gallery of Art. So QAnon is out here promoting conspiracies about child predators and trans and queer people being pedophiles. But Edgar Degas was himself, now we're realizing, was probably going to ballet studios and, you know, observing young children, and this work is quite problematic. And now we, you know, this pedophilia is actually quite pervasive, and this might seem kind of like a strange, kind of erratic thought to bring up in a conversation on ufology. But as I was saying earlier, like our higher being essentially is not activated if we don't resolve this aspect of our really what is, I think, really ubiquitous, sort of intense misogyny. Quoting also, I think we're thinking about some thoughts that Timothy Morton shared in his talk last week, that misogyny is so pervasive and that child abuse is actually an extension of misogyny. So this is our mission is to go, I think, from a kind of adversarial position, from thinking of everything that is strange and foreign as something that is our enemy, which in tarot it would be like, if we've got the upside down devil, it would be like, hey, you're not dealing with your shadow. But how do we make this transition from being amorous and loving? That's my cash app. just thinking of, you know, I had this page, and I'll just read this, and maybe I might end here. Is that the high futurism of being trans is that it involves a kind of like astral travel of body, form, destiny, reality. It's an escape out of coloniality. So if my sisters, if all my trans femme friends out there all receive healthcare, that this brings us closer and closer to an amorous loving position, what some theorists are calling a transgender Marxism. And so I figured, okay, maybe you can, all proceeds go to like my transition. And I think just thinking about, you know, where like individual bodies also can get us closer and closer to a different type of political structure. Paraphrasing, I think, again, Morden, getting closer to like an eco-sensual socialism. Okay. I think I'm gonna stop because I'm out of time and I would love to get your questions. But thank you so much for your
Any questions or comments?
Yeah, so I had a thought when you were talking about Roswell and the idea of being tested or gifted things. And I was curious how often you thought that this event sort of happens. I had a conversation with someone about ancient Egyptian pottery and how like mathematically perfect it could be. And to me, it's just inconceivable that at the time with the tools they had, this was something that we created out of thin air, the ability just to like make things perfectly level. So I don't know if you had any thoughts about that.
Yeah, maybe the speculation you're getting at is that some of our ancient artifacts were not exactly made by humans, right? That is a part of the mythology and the lore. Thinking about, I think some of the arguments that Carl Jung makes in his book, and even Pasolka, that the ET and the UFO phenomena actually doesn't have to be physical, doesn't have to be kind of exist outside the body. So in Jung's book, a good portion of his book is it's dream analysis of different, a number of his patients who have dreams about UFOs. So there's a theory there that, you know, that ETs can communicate and probably prefer to communicate through the dream space. So thinking about the Egyptians or any kind of advanced civilization, I think it's almost like, I think for me, like it doesn't matter if it was like a physical external presence, but it might have been kind of insight that they acquired, the kind of tool building skill sets that they acquired through different practices and communal practices, right? So this is a pre-capitalist society where it was also very social and community based. So I think right now our suffering is really from this highly individualized culture where we're not sharing enough. And I think the Egyptians themselves also had a much more different, or very different conceptualization of time. And so I think that they were probably able to build up a certain kind of knowledge through generations, right? And that's something that I think is very rare and almost unheard of for our current moment, where if a scientist dies, then it's almost like impossible for that work to continue. I mean, it does, right? But there's like effort that has to happen for a certain lineage to happen. Like if I die tomorrow, like who's gonna keep going with this work? It's again this very individualized culture and just a very limited maybe sense of time scales. If that answers your question.
Yeah, it was sort of an open thing. I wasn't looking for a specific answer.
Yeah. There's also, my friend in South Africa, he says it's that the Egyptians had like a kind of sound acoustic technology. They were able to use acoustics to like manipulate mass. And again, it's like, well, where did that insight come from? Maybe they just meditated more than we did.
Interesting. Other questions?
Thank you so much for this talk. I'm actually going to call out my student Chloe here because we were just talking last week about the so-called ancient aliens theory in our class on witchcraft and magic and religion. And we were talking about how it has had this history of being a racist theory, this idea that like, oh, these non-European ancient civilizations couldn't have come up with these amazing creations on their own. There had to be this external alien force that came in to give them this knowledge. And in my understanding of your discussion here today, you really changed the sort of significance of the idea of aliens here, that it could be that, yeah, okay, it was the Mayans, it was the Egyptians who created this through their own communal practices, and they themselves ascended and became these guides. And I just want to make sure I'm understanding that right, because that seems like such an important intervention on the sort of like humanistic inquiry, history of this as a topic of humanistic inquiry.
Yeah, actually, you know what? I switched over. This is my ongoing present, like, this is the day-to-day that I have with my students. It's insane. It's something we were discussing. I mean, we talk about so many wild things. To answer your question, let me find that. Oh, there you go. Have you guys seen Arrival? This is a film you're sort of familiar with, right? So the Arrival aliens are, I guess I was saying with the previous question, is like the Arrival aliens have a circular understanding of time because their writing is circular. So let me see, how can I get to your, well, actually, next slide. As I was saying, right, so if like these ancient civilizations had especially if they had a more scaled up version of time, it would be that it's not necessarily that they would be like omnipotent, right? I think that's a stretch to say like, oh, the Olmecs or anyone else, they were godly. Maybe for our own understanding, they might have been godly, but maybe they just were more present. And so I want to land there on just maybe the type of awareness that they have about their systems. And also, I think going back to Chardon, is that they were probably maybe more tapped into what is Kennemer in Braiding Sweetgrass. She says the original instructions, that the earth can essentially kind of sap information into our brain, and we just have to listen better, right? So this idea, I think, or this distinction between being omnipresent versus being omnipotent, I think is a distinction that is nuanced, and that is explored, I think, with the Arrival aliens. So the Arrival aliens, they're not necessarily omnipotent, they're just omnipresent because they are observers of the full time-space continuum. Yeah.
There are 2 more questions, one here. Go ahead.
I can keep going too. I mean, also language changes our definitions and sensations. This is where, trans theory, gender theory is now we have non-binary identities and this kind of like the multiplicity of beings. And as we know, also Indigenous people had a much more like fluid, complex understanding of gender, right? Yeah, sorry. I'm just kidding.
No, it's fine. My question is more about that idea of like the non-local saviors. I know you kind of said about the word savior, but that interaction with the savior coming in and maybe the interaction between that and like a colonialist ideal of someone coming in, having these higher ideas, being that savior that's not from here, like, and maybe what you think about that and maybe in the day-to-day thinking of this.
Yeah, thank you for asking that, because I do want to offer more granularity there with that word. I put it under quotation marks because that's just like, we are so embedded, I think, within a kind of Christian dogmatic tradition that we sometimes have to use this very like theistic language. And so I would say it's a kind of a misnomer to say like savior, and that really what I mean is like that we each need to be our own savior. So Philip K. Dick comes up with this concept, which maybe is borrowing from other traditions, the Salvator Salvandus. It means the saved savior, the savior who saves himself or themselves, right? So we don't need an 18th civilization. We don't need like European colonizers. What we actually need is really more of a symbiosis, right? So to expand further, my final sort of line of thinking here, like what if the Europeans just decided to embrace every other people that they met. What could have happened? What kind of gifts would have been exchanged there, right? And that's not saying like, oh, someone needed to be a savior. It's just like, what if we just start trading the information? Because it's all just about building data. It's all, I think now we're thinking about AI, and it's like AI is growing and it's sentience because we're just feeding it more information, and it's like it doesn't have to be this like colonial process or where someone is demolished and killed, right? It's like demolishment, and even that kind of savior thinking, what it leads to is like laziness, because you feel like, well, someone else is going to do the work for me. And this is, I think we're seeing it right now with like Israel and Gaza, where like I've heard theories, right? It's like Israel's doing all of this because they want the Messiah to come back. Well, that's a big problem, right? So I would alert everyone of like not only a savior complex where you think that you need to save other people, or the Messiah complex where you're expecting someone else to come and assist you.
You mentioned that like Indigenous language is like a sonic attempt at understanding like an alien knowledge. Do you think that there's like a pathway to understanding like the alien like ancestral knowledge within like a sort of like colonial language that we have to share?
Wait, tell me that again?
Like, so you said about that like Indigenous language is like an attempt, just sonic attempt at like understanding like alien knowledge. But do you think that there's like is like a true, I guess, like pathway to understanding like alien knowledge without Indigenous language, like since you guys speaking like colonial language?
Oh, right, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. We actually don't need to be talking at all. We just we could be out and listening to like crickets and grasshoppers. I made this for the students. This is a draft. Like, don't judge me too much. But in like okay, so discernment is like a concept within religious studies. It's like how you tell apart like what is like misleading reality versus something that's actually authentic. Thought actually interrupts authenticity sometimes. Thought it just conceptualizes everything and it tries to categorize every single organism. Maybe other indigenous languages don't do that as much. Definitely English does. But I feel like to answer your question, can we do that within the structures of the English language? Yes, if we just shut up more. If we stop talking so much. If we stop, I think English too is a over-rationalizing system. It tries to rationalize everything, and it's a very empirical language. And it can feel very fixed, And I love the English language. It's like I love the poetry of that, if possible. But I build them. So I was building this like discernment protocol to be like, how do you judge a theory versus between like something that's just outright a falsification versus something that could be really true. And at the end, you'll notice I never say like, actually, yes, this theory is right. So even with like cultural or indigenous knowledge, if the theory comes from like indigeneity, Bigfoot, for example, there's indigenous cultures that make a space for the Bigfoot phenomena and the Bigfoot entity, and they explain it a certain way. I would say even if you were a part of that culture, you then to really to know for certain that something is certain, you have to just go quiet. So the answer will come from the East. It would be like Zen Buddhism. The concept here of sunyata means emptiness. You just have to like go to a space of silence. I think, as I said yesterday in class, that God exists in a space of silence, in the space of words. And that's just me borrowing from like Timothy Morton from last week. But yeah, I think it's completely possible. Children do it all the time. And that's because there's like talking gibberish.
This is the last one, and please continue the conversation in a more informal way after.
So I had technically two questions. I think you had a slide on stages of development.
Oh, yeah.
I kind of wanted to see that one more time. And also, speaking on, stages of development, when it comes to transcendence and dealing with one's shadow, does that mean our existence or our life is put forth towards trying to understand our shadows, or casting them away? Like, what do you personally believe could be?
Yeah, so the shadow, for those of us who are not familiar, I think it's a term that's kind of being thrown around a lot in social media circles. It's kind of an easy way to describe like anything that's like suppressed or taboo, a taboo aspect of your personality. Yeah, I mean, Jung, I think this is one of his main contributions within like analytical psychology, is that he's trying to right, he comes up with some really elegant archetypes for us. So the animus concept is something that could be thrown onto that kind of duality that you're describing between self and the shadow. The anima is usually thought of as like the feminine aspect of yourself, male as, or the animus is like the male aspect. Yeah, completely. I think that integrating kind of those two aspects is sort of the cosmic journey, right? I'm not sure how, maybe that's going to take us millions of years to get there, but I also think it has to happen. As I've also heard from a friend, it's like even the bad is in the service of the good. And if those dualities were fully resolved, that actually would really be like the end of the cosmos. Like the universe would basically reset. And that's kind of a current theory, I think, within quantum physics right now, that we didn't have a Big Bang, it just was like a bounce, that the universe is bounce. So I think eventually when everything is resolved, we go to the void. This is nothingness. But I think for us now, I think thinking like short term, this is what I was getting at when I was saying humanity, like unite your opposites and like go back and learn the sacred arts of living in a cave. Is like go back to we only have the cave. I keep saying this, is like Plato was wrong. Like there's nothing outside the cave. there's only the interior shadows and holograms, right? That's another kind of ufology. UFO theory is that the universe is just like a projection from like some cosmic camera or something. So yes, I think the short answer of it would be like yes, we have to like integrate the shadow. And sometimes, you know, in some sects, it's like, I think I'd have to do more research into this, but it's like Christ sometimes is also thought of as like the devil. That there's it's a sort of a duality between like Lucifer and Satan. Satan is kind of the dark harbinger of bad stuff, and then Lucifer is actually the angel of light. But they're both like one and the same.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much for taking the time to share this new research with us during Humanities Week. Again to Jay for this wonderful discussion.